Good day, chess world. So, this session is focused on the idea of what is an endgame and how do we approach endgames. Also, what distinguishes the difference in endgames? Two other chess positions, middle game, opening. And first, we're going to understand that when we talk about an endgame, we're talking about something with limited material. And everyone's memory of an endgame is a situation where there's a tiny amount of material on a king and pawn, a king and rook, plus one pawn. That is the idea of what most people have for an endgame. But those are what we call theoretical endgames. That is the mass majority of endgame books and endgame literature, endgame videos are on these theoretical endgames. But the actual most important endgames that occur most often, what we call practical endgames. And they're very different. Now, let's first start with understanding this concept of a endgame that is theoretical. What do we mean? It's a theory endgame. There's a certain way that they found that is best practice to play the position. So apparently what you're supposed to do to improve is to go and sit and study these endgames and learn them by memory. Well, I'm going to tell you plain and simple, that's wrong. It's nice to learn them. It is useful, but that's not actually going to grow your endgame skills. What is going to grow your endgame skills, as we'll see, is understanding practical endgames and understanding planning in the endgame and where it's different. So this we're going to first start off. This is a theoretical endgame. And let's get an understanding of why I'm cautioning you about learning theoretical endgames by rote and thinking that's the only way that's going to grow your endgame. Here we have an endgame where white is Capablanca, one of the greatest endgame players of all time. And on black side is Vera Minchek, who was the women's world champion and a great player. And we're about to see both sides make substantial mistakes in this case, quite simply because this endgame's hard. And, well, for us modern chess players, we typically play this kind of endgame with very little time. And now if you're trying to sit there and memorize, where am I supposed to put my rook? What am I supposed to do with my piece? It's very tricky. So first and foremost, let's understand how this endgame goes wrong. So this one with black to play, black plays rook to a6. And the idea of rook a6 is very simple. It's to try and keep the tension on this square. But shock horror, guess what? Black has already gone wrong. Black should actually gain control of the promotion square. Very important to stop this pawn in this situation. So black should have played rook to b8 and control this 8th rank. But don't worry, watch this space. Both sides make mistakes. Well, here, even Capablanca, who's white, who's a wonderful endgame player, makes a mistake. He plays rook d7. So suddenly, black realizes, wait, this is a mistake, and they play rook a8. Wonderful. Okay, so it looks like we have a draw in this case. Uh, well, we have a theoretical draw, but it doesn't mean when that clock is ticking, you have to find moves, you have to know what you're doing, that you're just going to instantly find what this draw is. It's very tricky for black to defend because white can keep pushing, and black, on the other hand, doesn't have finality of what needs to be done. So here we get rook back to e7, rook a6. She repeats the mistake. Well, Capablanca is not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. And of course, he doesn't make the same mistake twice. So now king f8 check gains control of the promotion square. King g6, pawn to f7. Here we get rook check, rook e8. Okay, this is supposed to be lost all day long. Check, king h7. And then suddenly king e8, shock, horror. The great Capablanca has made a massive error, as we're going to see. He's thrown it away. And we'll come back and we'll unpack what should have been done in this kind of endgame and just give you some ideas and plans so you can better approach this, depending what color you're on. And suddenly we get rook check, gaining control of the promotion square, king to e7, and as I said to you, gain control of the promotion square. So the job here of black is to ensure that there's no promotion. So just gain control of the square. So she should move her king to, of course, g7 in this situation. And instead, we get rook a7 check. Oops, this is a mistake. Why? Because now white can go and fix what is wrong, get the king out of the way. There is no chance for the black king to come back and defend this. And suddenly after rook a8, rook to e8, the game's over. This is lost. Very, very simple and good for us to see in this situation, which is wonderful. So, okay, white wins. So many mistakes. This is a theoretical endgame. Now, both of these are very, very good players for their times. And these are the kind of endgames that are theoretical, that you're just supposed to memorize from a book. But as I said to you, let's understand the definition of two different kinds of endgames, practical and theoretical. Most endgames are not like this. And as a matter of fact, when you get to these endgames, well, there is going to be lots of mistakes from both sides. So it's very difficult to memorize this kind of endgame and get there. So if you're going to grow your endgame skill set, we should concentrate on the most endgames you will play. And that, of course, is practical. So here in this situation, the goal and the fight all the time was over the promotion square. So right in the beginning, the job for black is to gain control of that promotion square. That is the job first and foremost. So here it should be rook to b8. And now again, if the king goes to e6, check, then the king goes to g8. And now if the rook goes to a7, now they can play check. And guess what? We now have if you've gone and done your homework, you can go look them up, the Philidor position or the Lucena position. This is the famous Philidor draw, where the rook goes in behind and harasses the king. It will be check, check until infinity and beyond. So just a simple draw, but that's because we know what to do. And also, in fairness, I don't have a clock running. I don't have an opponent. I haven't been playing for 5 hours. So it's easy enough to hold this draw. So that's basically the draw. It's all about the fight on promotion. And what I do want to highlight to you, if you get these kind of endgames and you're playing on the defending side, we talk about the short side and we talk about the long side. So your rook should be on the long side and your king should be on the short side. And that's a simple guide if your king gets forced out of the way of the promotion square. As we've seen, we actually want our king to be in control of the promotion square and in front of the pawn if we can. But if we get forced out, go to the short side, keep on the rook on the long side. And the reason for that is you want your rook as far away from the enemy king as possible, so it doesn't get interfered with. Rooks do their best work from far away. So that's the basic idea. But hold on. I said to you, let's define the difference between practical and theoretical. So here, this is a theoretical endgame. We mean the best path has been analyzed in theory books. But again, if you just go memorize these, they're useful. It is helpful. But much more valuable, as we will see, is a practical endgame. Now here, we have a very interesting endgame. This is a battle between two 2,600 grandmasters, spectacular players. These are very strong chess players. We're talking about the top percentage of human performance in all time. To get to 2,600 is exceptionally difficult. And here we're about to watch, in an equal endgame, how black collapses. There was no time trouble. Both sides had a decent amount of time on the clock. And black is going to collapse. And we're going to see why. Because black, number one, doesn't have a plan. And this is what I want to arm you with. How do you approach endgames? You need plans. And I'm going to give you simply two plans. Two plans to make it easy for you to focus in the endgame. Now let's focus here and see how black goes wrong. First and foremost, white plays bishop g4. Why? Well, the bishop was the worst placed piece. There's a piece doing the least, and there's a threat. There's a threat. They want to play bishop c8, going after this pawn. There's a clue there. There's a clue there about planning. So now the queen goes to e8. A little bit superficial with this queen e8 move. And we could imagine that even at this stage, with it being a Swiss tournament, black probably offered white a draw, wasn't really interested in trying to play on. And queen e8 is a very passive choice because if anything, probably queen to d8, getting onto the file is a bit better. But okay, white immediately says, well, this is a file. And remember, a queen is half of a rook. So it, well, is half rook, not half of a rook, is half rook, and wants to get onto the open file. So here we get king moving to f8, because why? Doesn't have a plan, just makes a move. Is it a bad move? Not terrible, no. Now white plays bishop d2. basically deciding that maybe my bishop should be repositioned here, since on this diagonal, it's kind of bumping onto, the square, which is not a big deal. So black plays bishop b8, and then very important moment here. Turns out bishop b8 is a mistake. Why? b5. What a nice move from white. Let's unpack why. Because in the game, they didn't play it, as we'll get a notice for, but it'll be very close to the game. They first threw in h5. White dropped the bishop back to h3, and then they took on b5. So what do they do? Bishop b5. Very nice turning the king into a target. And this is fascinating because they just moved their king to f8 earlier, and now they've suddenly made the weakness. So the queen goes to e7, and now we get this focus. They do not just take this pawn immediately. Why? Because their own queen is tied down to defending e4. So they improve the piece, which is doing the least. Bishop d7. Wonderful. Targeting the pawn, setting it up. Bishop to e8. And then white plays a very nice move. Just when we think we have a straight, simple move, they use a little bit of a tactic against the opponent. Queen d2, with the discovered threat of carrying onto this queen. And the whole point is built that earlier they could not play c6. Let's just have a look what would happen if they played bishop takes. c6 now wins the queen. Why? Because now it defends the bishop. Earlier, the bishop wasn't defended, so that tactic didn't work. And funny enough, this was probably black's best chance to get two bishops plus two pawns for the queen. But if we're honest, white's the only one who's going to win this, and this is a very difficult endgame to play. So black now plays king to g8. We get pawn to c6, attacking the queen, establishing the passed pawn. And suddenly after queen f7, bishop takes e8, queen captures, queen d5 check. Wonderful turnaround for this game. Now there's a pawn one square away from promotion. How big and transformative is this? And that becomes the number one plan of white is to focus on that pawn. Bishop a7, bishop d6. White is threatening to promote. Yes, black is defending enough times for now, but of course white then breaks that with queen d8. Probably we could say maybe a little mistake, but if we're honest, black is in a very difficult position. Bishop c5, and here black resigns. Why? Because the queen is threatened, the bishop is threatened. If the queen trades, the pawn will capture. If the bishop takes here, then of course they are going to promote. And after the queen has captured, if the bishop then moves back, they will send a second passed pawn to go and promote. Now this is incredible. We came into this game in a completely equal endgame. And let's understand the summary of what's just happened here. Completely equal. And here, a strong grandmaster collapsed and lost in 14 moves. Very, very important in this case. Strong grandmaster collapsed and lost in 14 moves. And it wasn't due to a series of blunders, shall we say. It was quite simply they played poorly. Why? They didn't have a plan. They did not have a plan. And I want to arm you with this. I want to get you an understanding. You need to have a plan. Jess, we have a famous saying, a bad plan is better than no plan. Well, the other part that people forget is, why don't we just get a good plan? And that's what I want to arm you with. In chess, in games, focus on two plans. Plan number one, attack your opponent's weak pawns. Plan number two, use your pass pawns. This is very important that we're going to unpack those ones and get an understanding why we have those plans. What does it mean for our planning in the endgame? And how does it operate? And here, when we take that lens and we start looking at this game, we can understand how white was able to comfortably outplay black from a completely equal position. And you can do the same to your opponents as well. When so many players think once a certain amount of pieces get traded off, oh no, it's a draw. It's an endgame. It's boring because they don't know what to do. And that is where you can score very well. Because now, let's have a look. Bishop g4, going after the opponent's weak pawn. So it ties down the queen. The queen becomes less because it has to defend a square in this position. Very, very important here. Now we get bishop d2 coming around, b5, using a tactical chance. But notice what they're setting up. They're trying to create a pass pawn. That's why I want you to also understand the language. Use your pass pawns. Now, you're going to hear a lot on the internet. You're going to read it in books. You're going to see it in articles. Even many masters are going to keep saying this misnomer. They're going to lie to you without even realizing it. You're going to hear push your pass pawns. This is a lie. Fake news. Use your pass pawns because you could be pushing your pawn to its death. So don't just focus on push your pass pawns. Use your pass pawns. So this one, we're trying to create a pass pawn. They played h5, pawn takes, bishop b4. Now we are threatening to create a deadly pass pawn, as we saw this happen in the game, and this wins it. Also notice the weak pawn that becomes the fulcrum of the play here. That is the center point, because we want to make a pass pawn. Had the king moved to g8, queen d5 check, and suddenly we are going to take their weak pawn, and we are going to be able to push the pass pawn that's running along here. So vitally important. They tried to play bishop, in this case with queen e7, to stop the tactic. And then another important theme that we'll carry forward and unpack later on. Don't trade your pawns for the opponent's weak pawns. Take your time and win them. Notice what white did here. They didn't rush to go take the weakness. Patience. Patience is a big expression in chess that you must remember. Play endgames slowly, slowly. Slowly on the clock and slowly on the moves. And this is what white does here. Bishop d7, slowly going to win that pawn. Bishop to e8, and then a very nice little tactic. Not the only way to play and win this position, but they play bishop to e8, queen d2, and the whole concept to understand in this position now is that they set up that wonderful tactic where pawn to c6 is going to create a pass pawn, and they go on to win very quickly. And it's in the space of just a few moves. If we return back, after this moment happens, here we would describe for master level players, Black has a convincing, strong endgame with a massive advantage in 5 moves. And we didn't see a huge blunder. It's not like Black just gave up a piece. This is something you can see in your games that you can learn from. How having a plan helps you to outplay your opponent. And this is the big one we want to work on, is end game planning. What are these two plans and how do we use them? So we'll unpack in the next one, what are these two plans and what are we trying to accomplish?